The Jack Miller Center for Teaching America's Founding Principles and History presents Dr. Alan Guelzo, one of the nation's leading scholars on Abraham Lincoln. Dr. Guelzo discusses what made Lincoln great with Dr. Michael Andrews.
Professor Guelzo, this is the bicentennial of Lincoln's birth, and we are very happy to have you in the Miller Center offices to answer some questions. Lincoln and Washington are generally considered to be our two greatest presidents. What accounts for Lincoln's greatness? Did the crisis of the Civil War amplify his greatest attributes, or would we nevertheless have acknowledged Lincoln as a great man had the Civil War not occurred, or had he not been elected president in 1860?
People who knew Lincoln, and especially people who knew him very well, always were very impressed by the man's range of qualities. Long before he advanced to national political prominence, people who knew him well understood that Abraham Lincoln was a remarkable man, easy to underestimate because, to all external appearances, he was at best a good lawyer, but a country lawyer. And he spoke with a twang. He looked like, I'm afraid to say this, but it's true, he looked like a hick. One legal associate of his says that when you met Lincoln for the first time, he struck you as being a kind of rough, intelligent farmer. And so it was very easy on first meeting Lincoln to assume that, well, this man was not terribly much. He was somebody fresh out of the backwoods and perhaps a nice guy, but a little hard to look at and maybe even a little hard to listen to. And when you drew that conclusion about Lincoln, you had probably made the first and greatest mistake you ever made about him. Another of his legal associates, Leonard Swett, once said that anyone who ever took Abe Lincoln for a simple-minded man would soon wake up with his back in a ditch, because behind the appearances, there was a man of some really extraordinary qualities. Now, the war does bring those to the fore, because the kinds of qualities that we find in Lincoln, his resilience, his perseverance, his commitment, the sense of steadiness and unwaveringness in the man, those were all things that in the conduct of a war in a democracy are absolutely non-negotiable qualities for leadership, and especially presidential leadership. So you might say that the war really opened up a field on which Lincoln was the ideal kind of player, not to say leader. Yet at the same time, even if there'd been no war, even if the Civil War had not happened, even if war had been staved off, or if Lincoln had been elected president in some other context, I still think that we would mark Lincoln's presidency as a great one. For one thing, look past the immediate circumstances of the Civil War itself to what Lincoln's domestic agenda was during the war years. Because there was a domestic agenda going on during the war. People are often distracted by the drums and the bugles and the carnage of the Civil War, and to think that that was the only thing happening between 1861 and 1865. It wasn't. Lincoln, at the same time, was managing a complete overhaul of the domestic agenda of the United States.
Which was made possible by secession. There was no longer Southern Democrats dominating Congress.
Exactly. In some respects, those who had opposed these policies, going back into the days of Henry Clay, and mind you, Lincoln looked upon Henry Clay as his beau ideal of a statesman. Lincoln was a Whig and an ardent Whig for most of his political life. Lincoln, during the presidency, is able to put into place almost every important piece of Henry Clay's so-called American system, which had been stymied time after time after time from the 1840s onwards. Even if there'd been no Civil War, we would look back upon Lincoln's domestic agenda and really see Lincoln's presidency as one of the great hinge presidencies in American history, like that of Thomas Jefferson, like that of Franklin Roosevelt.
This has been a Jack Miller Center digital media presentation. For more information, visit thejackmillercenter.org.